So welcome to our panel. Another business model is possible. Thanks for coming, even though it's so sunny and nice outside. And I'm going to start from your left with Adriano, who is, I think, the most international person I know. He's an Italian journalist married to a French woman living in California. He also is a serial entrepreneur. The last company he started has the purpose of bringing fantastic bread to California, finally, which is a great purpose to have. And just a year ago, he started Pactio, which is a micro crowdfunding platform that helps journalists be funded by basically their fan base. That we'll talk about more in just a minute. To my right, there is Amanda Michael. I'm really happy to have you on the panel. She's, let me get the title right, Global Director and Senior Product Manager of Contributions at The Guardian. The Guardian has a especially interesting business model, I think, and your title already reflects that you work globally, of course, as The Guardian does, and also that you work with the business and the product side. Last but not least, we have Frédéric Filloux, who has had a splendid career in journalism in France, so he knows the industry inside out. And as the editor of the Monday Note, he analyzes media industry and tech industry every week. And that's exactly what he's here for today. So give them a clap of hands, please. Before we get started discussing some really interesting topics here, I'd like to know who works with business models directly from you? And who has a startup where he is about to rethink business models or elaborate the business model more? Cool, very interesting. So please start thinking about questions you have for those guys, because I really want to make this a discussion from all of us. Adriano, I'd like to start with you. Could you pitch us the business model of Pactio in 2 minutes?
So when I started thinking about this panel, I had a big frustration. The fact that we usually, as publishers, media professionals, think that there are two types of people. The very evil people who install ad blockers who will never pay for our content, and the very religious people who worship at the altar of our journalism every day and who are ready to even sell their mother for us, right? So the reality is that there are lots of shades of gray, and what we have, in a very humble so far way, tried to do with Pactio was to say, okay, can we create Pactio in Latin means patto, a pact. Can we create a pact between the readers and the journalist on the reader's terms? So what is that the reader really wants? Does the reader want to subscribe or become a member of your journalism as a whole? Or maybe there are things that are more specific that they want. So for instance, at Pactio we launched several micro-subscriptions where the crowd, that's why we're using the term crowdfunding, can fund specific bits. So specific verticals. We have started at the local level, but it can work somewhere else. So to give you an example, we have a journalist out of Utah. She's arguably the top expert as it comes to water journalism. How do we use water resources in Utah? Lots of people in Utah care about water. They can subscribe to her individually and give her $3 a month. So very small amounts, so like a micro subscription every month, and she would give to them a special newsletter to make them feel special. She would reply to their questions, which is something that journalists very rarely do. The comment section in most newspaper sites are, as you know, terrible. So we've done that. Another thing that we've done was crowdfunding for individual stories. So there is this big wave of populism, right? You know, everybody wants to have a say. But instead of, shouting in the dark in, social networks, maybe what you can do is, if you're serious, people often complain, why this, you guys never talk about this? Why you don't cover that? Okay, give me some money. So people give money for everything, for lots of causes. As a matter of fact, I'm now crowdfunding a personal project that Alina mentioned about bread, bread making. It's working well. So what is that you're interested in? Maybe there is a big scandal that in your town, your mayor, you think journalists should dig into. Maybe at the end, he or she will not find anything, right? But you can hire a journalist. So let's try to imagine new models that, again, are perhaps not in one of these two extremes, but more, let's fragment this audience. Let's see what they really are there for, to pay for.
Great, thank you, Adriano. So a few topics you touched upon and that we will discuss more deeply in just a minute are what does the user and the reader really want, topic-wise? Also, the journalist and his beat or her beat as a brand, and the conversation that users want to have with people they pay for. Amanda, I know that the business model of The Guardian is slightly more elaborate than Pactio. Probably, would you still be able to give us a 2-3 minute pitch of how you earn money?
Right, I'll try. So I think it's easier to understand The Guardian's business model when you know a bit about The Guardian. And that's because we've tried very much to find a business model that is very much rooted in both our values as well as our structure. So The Guardian itself is owned by the Scott Trust. You don't have to know many details about the Scott Trust, except that we don't have to essentially return value to an owner or a set of shareholders. The Scott Trust was put in place early in the 1900s, and the objective of it is to ensure that The Guardian can exist in perpetuity. Over the last decade, our readership has grown tremendously beyond the UK. So 2/3 of our readers are outside of the United Kingdom, with many of them in the US and Australia, but fairly across the world. And so what we've sought to do is have a business model, a way of supporting our journalism that essentially means, one, that the journalism remains open and accessible to people. Two, so that means no paywall. And then two, that people can support it regardless of where they live and what they can afford. Working in a global context means, of course, that the levels of support can vary dramatically by country. So we have two primary ways that readers can support us. Of course, like other media institutions, we have advertising that is a core part of our business, but I think for here, I'm speaking really to what readers themselves can do. So readers can contribute to The Guardian. That essentially means that you offer money in exchange for having enjoyed and made use of the journalism. You can choose how much and how often, as well as how you pay. We've noticed regional differences. So in the US, far more readers will choose to give a single contribution, or they might give repeatedly, meaning once every few months, several times a year, whereas a lot of our supporters, for example, in the United Kingdom and parts of Europe, are more likely to choose a monthly contribution. Some of these differences stem from differences in banking and the protections you have on your cards. We also have, for readers who we often will say are more transactionally minded, that we have some subscriptions open to you. There is a print subscription. The Guardian prints 6 days a week, Monday through Saturday, and our sister paper is on Sunday, The Observer. We have Guardian Weekly, which is a weekly, clearly, a weekly magazine open to you. We also have the premium tier of the app. The way in which we think about the subscriptions is that they're not putting a paywall around the content themselves, but what you're doing is you're supporting a different expression of the journalism. Obviously, maintaining print takes additional costs and resources, as does the app. So by and large, this has been our focus for the last 3 years, and in the autumn, we celebrated having 1 million supporters around the world. Yay.
Thank you very much. So a few ideas that you brought in that are really interesting, I think, are the ambiguity between a very high reach and the question how many people do want to pay, and how many people we want to make money off. So this ambiguity is really interesting, I think. Also cultural differences between, for example, the US and the UK, you pointed out, and the different needs that we have to address.
Yeah.
So we already had the business model of micro crowdfunding here, of donation and contribution. of subscription and of patronage. Can you guys think of anything else as a customer-centered business model? Are we forgetting anything, or are we like on everything here? Sounds like we're pretty much on everything here. That's great. So we're 9 minutes into the panel. After 2 pitches of 2 business models, basically, how important is it to keep things simple, to make it easy to understand what we ask money for? Frédéric.
Yeah. Before we start, Alina was asking to me to think about another business model, and I will certainly fall short of it because I wouldn't be able to invent, especially for this discussion, another business model. My idea is that, first of all, this kind of conference or discussion is always played with a great deal of pessimism. People will tell you about the state of the advertising, which is indeed a failure for the digital news industry. People will talk about the fact that the subscription is great, but you are when you develop a subscription model, you are actually in a competition on your smartphone or whatever with many stuff, including games, including Netflix and everything. I tend to be fairly optimistic about the future of this industry because...
and he's French.
Yes, I'm French, which is kind of amazing for... Yeah, that's the sunny mood of Italy, you know. It's kind of contagious to me. But I tend, I tend to believe that the current business model have not been thoroughly explored, and there are many levers to activate in order to optimize the current business model, whatever it is. For instance, I think, and it's funny because I noticed that in several sessions here, that it is great for a news organization to rethink, refocus on its own identity, its own purpose. Actually, in this industry, it is amazing to see how many publishers that are unable to state their very identity, their very purpose in a single sentence. So I'm glad when I hear that The Economist, for instance, the guy was sitting right here yesterday, wants to be the ultimate destination site. He wants to save time to people, that the Financial Times want to provide news, relevant news for the business community, and so on and so forth. I think not enough work has been done on the true identity and the true purpose of a news organization. That's one thing. Beyond that, there are other stuff to consider. For instance, improving the technology stack. Maybe I'm too much influenced with the 2 years I spent at Stanford recently, but I tend, and I'm pretty sure that aside of a very small number of large publishers, including The Guardian, who has an amazing technology team, most of the publishers are vastly investing in technology at absolutely every level. And when you look at it, there is a potential at every layer of the company to improve technologically the production, whether it is story detection using machine learning algorithm, whether it is working on readers' engagement, subscription conversion, audience segmentation with proper data, because we might talk about that later, but this is a magic word in which there is a big of a hollow, by the way, because many people talk about data without knowing exactly what they mean. So I think that the tech stack is extremely important. Finding the right metrics. I mean, since I've been in this industry and I've seen the unfolding of the internet, people will including newsroom, which is cool, are always requesting more data and more metrics and stuff. The question is not having too many metrics, but having the right ones. And actually, there are, again, very few publishers who are able to focus on the right metrics. So you basically, we will talk about that later, but you have the old world, which relies on very basic metrics, and you have the new world, including you or the Financial Times, who rely on a much more sophisticated set of metrics. And finally, I think there is Another important things to do, which is looking at other industry. I tend to believe that there are many sources of inspiration out there, which might be apply, which might apply to the news business. So we need to have a look at outside the media world.
Thank you, Frédéric. May I ask you what the measure of success is, Adriano? So that's highly important when you set up a startup. And you want to know, does it work? Does my idea work? Or do only I think it's brilliant? So what's your metrics of success? And I know that you already pivoted. Could you explain us why?
So I think it was Reid Hoffman from LinkedIn who said that launching a startup is like jumping off the cliff with a plane and you haven't figured out yet whether the engine works. That's a good...
Actually, if I may not correct you, but amplify what you're saying, I think Reid Hoffman said that it's like jumping off a cliff and building the aircraft in the process, which is true, by the way.
Even worse, yes. So we jumped off the cliff about 10 months ago, and we started assembling the engine. So the first engine that we tried to assemble was based upon that model that I just described. So one beat, one journalist, very low amount as a subscription, starting with freelance journalists. And why did we do that? Because we thought, look, there is this big workforce of freelance journalists who have perhaps more entrepreneurial mindsets and who are perhaps more interested in experimenting, and who can be also more flexible in creating this offering. And so we off went building the engine and trying to find investments at the same time. We moderately succeeded in improving our main. We looked at the freelance reporter as a little bit of our customer in a sense. So our main goal was let's make this that has sense for them first, and so we increased their monthly revenue by 20-30%. So which was good from their perspective.
So 20%.
More for the freelance reporter by doing basically like 2 articles a month, more or less, and then answering people's questions. What we also found was that on the reader side, on the member of the Pact side, they really valued this opportunity to answer questions, to get their questions being answered. And what that tells us is that I think a lot of the journalism work today still revolves around this idea that we, as journalists, we are the broadcaster. And the people are there just to listen to us, which goes completely against the zeitgeist. Like the zeitgeist is, of course, it's a big, probably one of the biggest populist waves that we have ever seen in the history of the West. People want to have their say, no matter the color of their vest, the jacket they're wearing. And we're not here to analyze why and how, etc., but they want to have a say. So philosophically, we're saying, okay, you want to have a say, but let's assign roles here. So we have journalists who are supposed to be experts, right, in some areas, and instead of saying a journalist should only broadcast to you, let's have the public asking questions and the journalists replying to it. So people were loving that. So then what did we do? We pivoted towards a crowdfunding per story. So we said, you have an idea, no matter what, in a specific area. We started with the San Francisco Bay Area. You ask that question and you crowdfund the question before the journalists actually work on it. When you think about it, it's amazing because for the reader, you can really feel like you are paying for something that has a direct impact. So the questions, so we funded, in a month, we funded 35 questions in the San Francisco Bay Area. So people were asking questions like, why there is no Wi-Fi in the Caltrain? The Caltrain is a 19th century train that is still working.
Nightmarish stuff.
Yes,
yeah.
yes. That goes back and forth between San Francisco and San Jose. People were asking, why are streets in San Francisco so poorly cared of? Or why are schools in Redwood City so bad in comparison to Palo Alto? You know, a lot of questions that I don't even know whether or not we could qualify them as news per se, but this was what people wanted.
And how much would I need to pay for getting an answer to why?
You can pay whatever you want, and then the journalist sets the goal. Okay, so the journalists, like in this case, like freelance journalists, it was all the way between $50 and $500, okay? And so it was like pretty interesting. Then what happened was that we couldn't close our round of funding, and so we decided to pause on that. And now, big news, we are going to announce a very similar model to these two first experiments, micro-subscriptions and crowdfunding, but we're doing it with local newsrooms in 5 locations, rural areas, urban areas, a mix, and we're going to launch it in a month or so.
And what are the needs that you're meeting with that?
It's a need of, I think, of being heard, first of all. People want to be heard, and the fact that we are betting that journalism can have a say in society, that can be an active force of enlightenment, in a sense. Because the reality is that these questions are asked all the time, almost as a complaint, right, on social media, and then what happens is that, you know, the forces of hoaxes and fake news or just very superficial things take over. In our case, what we say, our journalists are going to make a phone call. Our journalists are going to really call the school district in Redwood City, which they did, you know. Okay, so why is it that in all these charts, your school are always very bad in the area? And so they provided answers, and we linked to these reports, and we dissected, we digested. I'm a big bread and natural fermentation person, so the journalism can also almost act as a positive bacteria to dissect, to eat the starches, and to start the digestion for you. That's what the journalists are supposed to do.
Yeah. If I
sure.
may I jump in, I think purely in terms of valuation of what you are doing, it is actually extremely important, because you are addressing a very important problem of, not problem, but issue of the news industry, which is the uniqueness of the content and the value added of the content, which I think is the most monetizable element you can think of. Every news organization which is successful at monetizing is betting on its uniqueness, and actually it's selling, whether it is subscription, contribution, whatever, one-time contribution, on its ability to deliver uniqueness. And we need to think hard about it, because right now we have a battle between commodity news and value-added news. A newspaper such as the one I was used to work for, big daily European newspaper, is going to produce something like 200 stories per day. Now, churn out 200 stories per day is mostly small, big, and etc. When you ask to a publisher, actually, how many of them you consider being value-added story? By value-added story, I mean story that carries real in-depth journalistic legwork, and that carries a very decisive angle, a very important spin, which is decided by editors. People will say, no more than 20%. And this 20% is the focus of the valuation of the news company. But still, for some reasons, for an alleged motive of exhaustivity, we are still going to produce 80% of stuff which is good, but which doesn't carry a specific value. So
I think you're bringing up a fantastic point, Frédéric. Thanks for that. And that is the shift in business models towards more let's say customer-based, customer-centered business model. Does that also change the content we produce? Amanda, is that something you experience?
So both our editorial mission and our business model are very much inspired by our editor-in-chief's mission. And she's laid out 5 principles for our newsroom, one of which, for example, says we won't just critique the world, we'll also look for solutions. And another speaks to fairness. Another talks about investigating and understanding sources of power, both power as we know it in traditional terms, but also, again, what individuals can do. And I think these 5 principles for us both distinguish The Guardian, and they also create the ethos for The Guardian. And those principles, too, also very much root our business model. I'm trying to think, but the specific question you asked me was,
what Frédéric just said is that we have, as a media industry, not enough stories that people think are worth paying for, if I got you correctly, right? So, what makes the content we deliver really, really unique to your brand, The Guardian?
Mm-hmm. So I think the principles themselves are, for us, our guidelines. And ultimately, the language that our editor-in-chief uses is the journalism itself meaningful? And these principles help us essentially gauge what we think is the meaningfulness of those stories. But I think this is something that, even though we have these guidelines, in practice, it's an everyday conversation. It's the routine of looking out on the world and asking, what are the stories that need to be told? How can we tell them so that they're of interest and value to our readers? And so we use a whole host of metrics, whether that's looking to see, are people reading through the whole story? Is this a story that really engages someone? When we're covering an issue like Brexit that twists and turns by the hour, let's look at the sort of composite of our journalism, this number of stories we're producing, but more meaningfully, how we're telling all those stories. So, from my perspective, that is very much the mission of the newsroom. When it comes to how readers support us, we do not, we are not making any sort of prescription or demand on the newsroom. I see my job as helping fuse the two. There are a few things that we have noticed. We do hear from many of our readers that they care very deeply about our environmental coverage, and that this is an issue that they care about, but also one that they turn to The Guardian for. And we see this both in the data, we hear this from our readers on social media, on email, through all the interviews that we do with them. And I think knowing this has made us that much more conscientious and aware of how we cover the environment, what we're putting into that coverage. If anything, it's been, I think, affirming and reassuring, because this is an issue that we've cared about tremendously for a long time and continue to invest in, but it's not changing the coverage in any sort of simplified way.
Do you do more coverage of the environmental issues now?
We've had a very strong commitment to it for a long time. If anything, I think this just showed us that both the readers' interests and our coverage are aligned.
Yeah.
So at the last Online News Association conference, there was a panel organized by the Dallas Morning News, and they were telling us about a data-driven kind of analytics exercise that I'm sure every single newsroom would do, that a developer can basically set up in half an hour, but sadly nobody does, I think. So you have a subscription, you have some free content, okay? So there is one thing called funnel, okay? So funnel, what is a funnel? It's like we are nella patria del vino, you have a beautiful bottle of pecorino and you pour it into your glass. So luckily, 100% of that wine will fall into your glass, okay? But chances are not 100% of readers who are reading your free stories will convert to subscriber, right? So what they did was to just say, okay, there is a variable, an event, like the developers will call it, an event. Okay, what's the percentage of people that will subscribe after reading a free article? And what are the articles that they just read? What is the last article they just read that actually led them to subscribe? And they found that, if my memory helps me here, that 2 main things were driving that. One were big investigative stories, and the other one was very low tech high school sports, okay? So they decided to create a special subscription for high school sports in Dallas, And that special subscription, I think $1.99, basically didn't cannibalize the main offer, but instead brought new, fresh blood to their journalism, and it had been only 3 months into the thing, but it was on the path to basically bring as many subscribers as the main one. And they were thinking about doing something more like this. So it's also our fight. We are saying you have to think about unbundling. You have to unbundle. Yeah.
Thanks for that, Adriano. I think you're bringing up a really interesting topic here that I would want to address Frédéric with. If on the one hand side we have what Adriano just pointed out, a quite cheap subscription for a specific topic that I'm very interested in. Let's say I'm a sports person and I really don't care about culture, politics, leave me alone with that. So
the opposite of me, actually. I hate sports.
Yeah, same with me, but never mind, just for the sake of the example.
Sure.
And then on the other hand, something we have in Germany quite a lot, the subscription price that is, the digital subscription price that is just as high as the print subscription price, and many publishers in Germany would not want to go off this price. So we have those two extremes, a lot of different tiny subscriptions addressing specific needs of users, and on the other hand side, something the publishers must be interested in, a very high pricey subscription. What's the right way?
Wow. First of all, I think among the things we can improve is, of course, the segmentation of the audience. And one way, when you mentioned that the 2/3 of your readership is outside your country, I think it is an incredible potential, because if I'm correct, I was told that you have, need to be very careful here, you have 150 million UVs per month, I was told. Okay, I was not wrong. Which is incredible. But you have only 1 million paid for one way or another people, which is incredibly small, which is not by no means a criticism. It also shows the potential you have. And last week in a conference in Paris, I was having a discussion with someone from the New York Times, which is basically having the same issue. They have 100+ million UVs per month, and they have only 3 million customers, which is not bad by industry standard, but still.
That's a very good point too. Is that something we have to get used to? Like, do we, have to think that probably 2% of the readers might, pay?
No, actually, I'm ready to. I'm absolutely convinced that this kind of newspaper, you at the Guardian embody, and the New York Times, obviously, have a huge potential for that. But the question is, to which extent, in terms of reader segmentation, my belief is that, for instance, you need to adjust the price of your subscription to your local market. Someone in Indonesia, and you have something like 300 million English-speaking people with a college degree, which is a huge potential audience for a newspaper like you. Someone in Indonesia won't be able to pay the same price than someone in South Korea, for instance. North Korea, they don't have anything. So, but I think that in terms of segmentation, news organization like yours, I'm not sure, I don't know if you are considering this, but you really need to go against the local market and the ability to pay in the context of the purchasing power. That's one thing, for instance.
May I play the devil's advocate here? Wouldn't you say that? Thank you. Sorry. Wouldn't you say that somebody in Jakarta is likely to be able to pay a price that is similar to somebody in Bristol, whereas somebody in Sumatra might not be able to pay the same price? Isn't that a dangerous path to go down?
No, I think, no, it's not a dangerous price, because, I mean, the whole idea for the Guardian or for the New York Times is actually to improve the number of readers they have in Jakarta or something like that. So quite the contrary. I think by segmenting further the market, you need to. But I mean, you were referring to the students' market, for instance. Let me give you the following anecdotes, which sum up to me the thing. In France, we have a couple of newspapers. I was told that by a publisher. I won't name, of course, because okay. And when to address the students' market, and I'm going to talk about the old metrics versus the new metrics. They decided that they discover that they have some kind of, they give copies for free, basically, in universities, in business school and stuff, which is okay. And they, on the other hand, they need to raise the number of digital subscribers they have. So they turn to the association of students and stuff, and they say, guys, you need to, we would like you to buy here 50 subscription, here 200, and so on and so forth, all across the French territory. And of course, you will have the association of students which will say, I don't have any dime, I don't have a dime to do that. How can I'm not going to subsidize because I don't simply have the means. And you have the publisher responding, okay, you will, but we are going to pay you through another channel, for instance, for your project, for your whatever, for your marketing or for some stuff, just to offset the price of the discounted advertising. It means that they are creating readers that will be basically stuffed into the system, that will be basically subsidized, with no whatsoever idea of the actual engagement of this reader. Do they read the news organization, and so on and so forth. We have been doing that in France for quite a while, with the unique single metrics in mind, which is the number of subscription. Therefore, we have publishers in France who are able to boast about their huge increase in subscribers, which is not fake subscribers, technically speaking, but it doesn't have any value because we have no idea about the engagement of this readership. The polar opposite of it is the Financial Times, for instance, which is super segmenting its own audience. They have created a network of, I think, 3,000 universities, schools and stuff, for which they will be opening their paywall, which is pretty stiff, opening their paywall selectively in order to gather more students and to help people to give context to their work and so on, which is a totally difference. On one hand, you have the old world, we are just going to stop the channel and counting our subscription. On the other hand, you have people who are going to try to detect and try to favor readers who might be engaged in the future with their titles. So that's one important thing. Sorry.
Yeah, I would love to address you with the question of, you already have a threefold subscription contribution system at The Guardian. Are you thinking of unbundling or segmenting even more?
Yes. I think when we started this, and I'm just listening to the other panelists, I think often when, inside your organization, you talk initially about the business model, it's often a more blunt and binary sort of existential discussion. Is it this or is it this? But over time, hopefully, when you set things up, you're able to both use the data and reader response to really refine it, and I think to bring it into alignment with your purpose and your model, which actually opens up all these opportunities that you might not have seen because you better understand what the reader's needs are. So from the Guardian's perspective, when we originally launched membership, it was very much focused on recurring payments, so monthly and annual payments. Now that's very much the way in which many people in the UK support cultural institutions. And that's in part because the cards that you use, like this is a very simple thing to sign up for. I come from the States where that hasn't been the case. I mean, sort of shocking admission, when I moved from New York to London, I was still writing a check for my rent. And I think services like PayPal and Apple Pay are very much filling that sort of need in the market. So I felt really strongly that for our American readers that we should enable them to give single contributions. Why? That's both a cultural habit, but it's also one that people could feel comfortable with. We offer recurring to Americans as well, but a smaller percentage of them choose that option than do our readers in the UK and Europe. But we're starting to find, as we talk to more of our American readers, that for some of them, so I'm giving you some examples of the kinds of things that we learn that in effect evolve our project and our work. We've heard from our American readers that for some of them, they would be interested in saving payment details. They just don't want to use a certain card. But for others, they love the act of contributing. They really enjoy it. They actually don't want the money voluntarily drawn from their account. And when they give, they're giving because they see something in particular that they love. And so right now we're in the process of thinking about how is it that we can create an experience for these readers on our site that frankly is much more enjoyable and one that doesn't have as many requests to give. It's like, how do we manage the experience? And I think in the next year, one of our real priorities is making sure that, in a way that's GDPR compliant, that we can identify people on our site who are contributors who are already supporting us so they're not asked to give again if they shouldn't be. And for those who want to set up a voluntary arrangement with us, that we can really abide by and respect those principles. So in terms of segmentation, we have segmentation that I think is product-centric, so single contributions, recurring contributions. We also have contributions vis-a-vis subscriptions. And to your point, we also have country segmentation. And so here, when we ask people to contribute, we do have some suggested amounts. These are set both based on research we've done into that culture, but also we abide by the kinds of amounts that people are naturally giving us. But that obviously gets very complex over time.
How do you identify which user might be one who pays, one who contributes, one who subscribes, etc.? How do you identify them?
So if you take the US, how would I put it? In the UK, subscriptions play a much bigger part. That's where we have our print publication. And so if you're in the UK, you will see more promotions for subscriptions than you will, for example, if you're in the US. We also know that if you're in the US, you're more likely to contribute, even if you're a more casual reader. Part of that's a sort of cultural attitude towards giving. And so the way in which we approach it is based on the research and the behavior that we see on the site. And I think that's part of the point that I'm making is that the aim is, of course, to make your work and your approach better and better and better. And for us, what has helped us, and I think there are plenty of things that we need to fix and adjust and ways in which we want to build on our work, but what's really helped us, I think, has been to create a culture internally in which we can sort of openly discuss what's working, what's not working, how we want to evolve the model, because it's really that sort of obsessive focus on improvement that I think will get us there. Because what we're really talking about is both how you define your model and then how you refine it over time. And you need to have, I think, those strong data practices and methodology in order to refine it in a way that frankly meets your needs and your readers.
Can I ask you a question, Amanda?
Sure, of course.
From what I understand, there is a question for people who are working on the subscription business, which is to which extent they should open the principle of subscription. Let me explain. If you take Netflix, you can go back and forth, leave, coming back 2 months after that, and etc. If you take the subscription of any newspaper, they tend to lock you, including small one, by the way. They tend to lock you for 1 year. You try to resign, and they send you, oh, too bad, my friend. There is only you still have 6 months at $35 a month to pay for. And when I was at Stanford, I sit at the School of Business with a guy from Netflix, and he said to me, the model of letting people go as they wish and coming back as they wish does have some virtue, because first of all, it keeps everyone on the edge, people from the commercial side, also people from the editorial side, because everyone is involved in actually the collection and the retention, the recruitment and the retention of subscribers. And from what I know, there is a growing number of publishers who are pondering this model, who are considering going to this model with all the risks associated, but also all the benefits, which is, okay, you're with me because you like my product. I will try every single day to make my product better. You're free to go, but if you go, we will try to get you back as soon. My question is, sorry for this long explanation, but is it the kind of model you are considering at The Guardian?
So I myself am not overseeing subscriptions. I have a wonderful colleague who's doing that. But I can tell you we have discussed this, and actually both for contributions and subscriptions. I mentioned that our aim is to make it possible for people, regardless of where they live or what they make, to support us. And there are reasons that we would do this to recognize both personal circumstance and for business reasons. Actually, in the terms and conditions of contributions, people can ask for a refund for a month after, in case they actually have run into personal difficulty. This sometimes happens, and people can tell us some things come up in my life. May I have my contribution back? And we will honor that. We also know that things happen in people's lives, and so we've talked about, the possibility of letting someone put something on pause. And I don't see why we would do that for one and not another.
Great. There is still so many interesting topics we could discuss up here. One of is the role of platforms. We touched upon retention only very briefly. And another thing that is really interesting is, I think, are the experiences of local newsrooms Adriano has had and the struggles they have in monetizing the content, just tech-wise. Just to give you a few examples, but I really want to open up the floor now, because it's rare to have such a knowledgeable audience. So if you have questions, please raise your hands. There's one already here. Please go ahead. The microphone is coming.
Thank you. So my name is Sebastian. I'm a co-founder of Steady, which is a membership platform for independent media in Berlin, and we have 300 small and medium-sized independent publications on our platform, mainly in Germany, but we're going into other European markets. So I really enjoy the conversation, and obviously, Adriano, I like your project because we're competitors in some way. But my question would be for you, Frédéric, because as you said, the mission of the publication seems to be what's really converting people. It's not so much the content, but what you're promising. And I feel like you yourself and the Monday Note, you have a really great, clear positioning. And someone like Ben Thompson with Stratechery, he makes a lot of money. He lives from this. So when are you offering memberships? And what do you think about that?
Great question.
Yeah, Alina said, great question, because 2 days ago we had a discussion about making the Monday Note paid for. That's a good question. Yes, the publication you're referring to, Ben Thompson, is called Stratechery, and I think they have 10,000. He has 10,000 paid for subscribers. He's making tons of money. He's working like hell. I'm a subscriber of his thing, and it's not very pricey. I think it's $9 a month. And of course, yes, I'm thinking about having this kind of stuff. Right now, I didn't do it because, and I've been doing the Monday Note for 10 years. I have 13,000 subscribers, which is not bad. Because it was a secondary job for me. I was having a job in other news organization. Then I was a fellow at Stanford. Now I have a startup called DeepNews.ai, which is eating up my life. And so I don't have the bandwidth to consider that. But yes, there are plenty models of membership that are available right now for medium to small stuff. So there is basically no excuse. The thing is, what could be the model? Should it be a freemium model in which I will give a small subset every week and offer to have the whole bulk of data and analysis paid for? I'm not sure it will fly. So yes, I have many questions. So your question is perfectly relevant.
Yeah, isn't it good to know that people would be willing to pay for? That's how I interpret your question.
I have one
actually.
Yeah. Thank you.
So you're please go ahead.
My name's Jacob. I'm the co-founder of a Danish digital publication called Zetland. And we do like all the things you're supposed to in terms of not doing the 20%, but just the 5% stories that we think have the most value, and we know why we're doing it, and everything's fine. But I just wanted to share one thing concerning business models, because of course we do like basically a subscription business model, we just call it a membership. But we figured out recently that there was like this invisible funnel, which you usually used to talking about in terms of digital sales, which was like the analog funnel. Because it turned out that more than 40% of our members, they came to us through word of mouth. And I think, so what we're doing, and we started doing it last year, was to figure out how can we support and help people spread the word about why it's important what we're doing. And I think it would be the same for The Guardian, that people are having dinner conversations, and they will mention something from The Guardian, and somebody else will think about signing up. And I think there are some great opportunities to actually help people be ambassadors out in the real world. And I was just thinking if any of you know of people that are doing great work in that area. And the other part of it is that we recently asked what people would like. We do that all the time, our members. You know, should we do books? Should we do more events? Should we do? And then at the end we asked, would you like to just give us more money? And 25% said, yes, we don't want anything more. We want 2 stories from you every day. We just want to give you more money.
What a great question to ask the users.
It is, and we do it all the time. And we were thinking in terms of doing different journalism and different formats, but in the end, they just wanted to give us more money. So that's a specific, and I'm doing 2 questions now, I'm sorry. And that's a specific one for you regarding The Guardian, which is if we were to split test donation communication and how to do it for the next 6 months, what do you think would be our most important findings? Because you might save us 6 months, which would be really nice.
How much will you pay her for the answer?
I'd be happy to talk about the evolution of the narrative and testing after the panel. So in terms of the social dynamic of this is something I care a lot about. Before working in journalism, I was an organizer, and so my focus was almost always on essentially how do you structure and scale a human network, and what that means, and how people can bring others into the work. What's interesting for me is when that dynamic introduces itself and how. So at The Guardian, when we originally introduced contributions and membership, there were times when we asked people if they might share this with others. And it was interesting to me from a cultural standpoint. I've now lived in London for 4 years, and my team is very much international, and the global implications of contributions, and I see differences in like how people divine the sort of private and the public sphere across cultures. And what we found originally in the UK is that people were less likely to share, but there's been a real transition recently, and it actually follows when we announced we had 1 million supporters. And we had heard, one of the reasons why we announced this is that we're fielding lots of emails from people. Actually, when we started membership and contributions, both running the product, I chose to answer incoming emails because I really thought it was a helpful way for me to understand really directly and immediately what people's experiences were like. And it was in that moment that people said, oh, this isn't just something I'm doing this with others. And that formally introduced a sort of social dynamic to it. And now we're thinking about it a lot more because people have essentially communicated to us that they're much more interested in proceeding in that way. We've also seen it when we've asked readers to support a specific editorial series. So in the US, we had a series called This Land Is Your Land. We covered the sale of public lands to private companies. And we asked those who supported the series why they did, but also, what their interest was in the coverage. And we learned that many of them were science teachers, science activists, environmental professors, and many of them told us, we want and need this coverage in the public domain. And I am supporting this series because I want other people to be able to read it and have access to it. Yes, and they were supporting it not so that they themselves could read it, but so that it was available to others. And this, for me, is really significant. And when I was saying, The Guardian's overall mission is to keep our journalism open and available, it's that people are doing it, not just that they can read the journalism, but that so others can. So it naturally is a social gift in and of itself. But how we go about it, we'll see, because I think the example you gave is really apt. We've heard from people they're much more likely to talk about it in person to someone than they are necessarily to post about it online. It's a much more intimate conversation.
Thank you. We have the time for one last question. I love
Thank you. I work for Internews, a media development organization, and my work is to support local media in the most challenging context you can imagine of war, extreme poverty, or transition. And often in this context, membership is not an option for many reasons, because people are too poor, because of there is no banking systems and people can't pay online, and most of them would not survive without grants, without support from international organizations such as the one I work for. And I'm just wondering, more well-established media, like the Guardians and other organizations that manage to do well in this challenging context, or the media is rethinking itself. Can't we imagine a model where there will be sistering, a local media organization, like being a media angel, helping a local organization in another country to grow, to thrive, so that they can exchange good practice, experience, and help them to grow this exchange between media that do well and manage to do well, and how many media the Guardian or the New York Times that can have millions of members supporting it. Can't we imagine a model where a well-established media can sisters support local media in context where it's freedom of expression is challenging?
And you're addressing the question to
the panel.
We have no time left. So let's
go ahead.
Yeah. No, just to say a brief answer, perhaps from you.
So I'm not sure if I fully understood, but I can tell you, and I'm happy to chat about it afterwards. So within our newsroom, we have often had partnerships with other organizations, sometimes one, sometimes many, and one of the questions that we are thinking about is how we can be supportive of the media ecosystem. Because I think as a publisher, we don't want other publications to fail. Of course, we have an interest in The Guardian, and The Guardian being a vibrant and dynamic publisher, but we're all in this together as well, because public trust in media is very much a reflection of the activity of all of us, not just those of us at The Guardian. And so, one of the questions that we are talking about, but I think it's fair to say there's so much in front of us, is really thinking about what is our responsibility to the media ecosystem. And as an organization that very much works globally, what does that entail?
Great, thank you so much. And thank you for your interest. And I'm sure the panelists will stick around a little bit in case you have more questions. Special thanks to Adriano, who organized the panel.
Yes.
Thank you. It's been a pleasure.
Should have probably.
You're like,
Today, the journalism industry faces many challenges. So we're introducing the Google News Initiative, our effort to enable journalism to thrive in a digital age. It will enable new models for sustainable journalism,